really, really late stage Lyme looks a lot like Alzheimer's, because generally people who pass away from Lyme disease, it is because of the heart, the brain, or the immune system, so Alzheimer's, late stage, it's like where the bacteria is in the brain. And we're seeing like a lot of famous people in the public now coming out about their chronic Lyme disease and being misdiagnosed, because it can look like a lot of other illnesses. Most people experience joint pain, that's kind of common, and headaches and mitigating pain, so pain that just moves throughout the body. So it's kind of like living with the flu every day. So people who initially get a bite, sometimes you get the bullseye rations, sometimes you don't. It's kind of nice if you get the bullseye because that's kind of a telltale sign. But one of the other problems that the difference between ILADS and IDSA is that about the testing. So IDSA is saying the testing is accurate, where ILADS is saying our testing is not accurate, and we've got to find better testing. In fact, is it Maine or Massachusetts just passed a law that if you go in the ER, you get a test for Lyme and it says negative, you have to sign a consent saying this negative may not really be a negative. It's like the chances of getting a positive are worse than flipping a coin. It's super inaccurate. So there are kind of like two standard tests the CDC uses. It's the ELISA and the Western blot. And it's a two-tiered process. So the ELISA is probably one of the worst tests possible. But if you have like an acute right away and you have the right kind of strain that they're looking for, then you can test. I mean, most of us don't have positive ELISA tests because it's just ridiculous how inaccurate it is. The Western blot looks for different antibodies, and that's probably a more better test. There's a company out in California called IGeneX, and they have the most sensitive Western blot. But even after you get the test, you need to have a doctor that's called a Lyme literate doctor look at that test and interpret it. Because the CDC may not recognize it as a positive test, but it doesn't mean it's not positive. For example, I had 3 positive bands. So I definitely had antibodies in my blood for it, but the CDC still wouldn't recognize that as a positive because I believe they say 5 bands is a positive test. But so you have to kind of do symptomatic and blood work tests, and I talked about the CB57. There is Dr. Horowitz, I kind of mentioned his name before, who's very involved in ILADS. He has an online test, like a checklist you go through and check symptoms. Kind of a classic telltale sign of Lyme is that it's migrating pain. So kind of every day it's different and moves around. That's kind of a sign. But that's a good test to look at, along with, of course, like scientific testing. Some more naturopathic doctors will use energetic or frequency testing, like a biomeridian machine, or there's a lot of different names for that type of testing. Personally, I think those tests can kind of give you a direction to go, but for me, I really, again, that type A driven personality, I had to know for sure. So I had, the Western blot with 3 bands. I had a doctor look at my blood under a live microscope, and naturopaths will do that and diagnose based on that. Some of them, not all of them, and that's not FDA regulated. So I did that test, and then I did like biomeridian, which is like it's like almost like a lie detector to the central nervous system, and that came back positive. And then, but again, I wanted to know for sure. So we invested in a test put out by Advanced Labs, and this was developed by Dr. Horowitz again, I believe. And it's a blood culture. So they take your blood and culture it for a couple months. And if they see spirochetes in your blood at the end of a month or 2, then it's a definitive yes. And I think even after some of us get diagnosed, we go through a denial process, just like any grieving process. You know, you don't want to face this illness, or so you kind of go in this, and I still do it, like get into denial. Oh, I'm fine, and then I'm like, no, this is real. I really have this illness. So it's like a $700 test. It's a really expensive test, and it's not considered, like, the only reason why the FDA didn't approve it is because it's expensive, you have to catch one spirochete in the blood. So if it's like in a dormant stage where it's hiding out in your tissues, then you're not going to catch it in the blood. So some doctors will put you on treatment for 2 months to try to kind of aggravate the Lyme and bring it out before they'll do the testing, like the Western blot or the blood cultures. So it really just depends on the doctor. So if you're like, wow, I have someone that has a lot of those symptoms, where do I go next? How do I look? And what I suggest is that you go to the iLADS website and look up a Lyme literate doctor, or look for local support groups that you can ask around about different doctors and who are educated. And we even have some doctors that are Lyme friendly. They're at least open-minded to look into it. Bacteria are different shapes and forms, and Borrelia is like a little spring. It's in the shape of a spring, and they call that a spirochete. So also syphilis is a spirochete. There's different tests for all things, like arthritis they look for inflammation markers. MS, they do brain scans or an MRI. In fact, I had an MRI, and a lot of people will get lesions in their brain or white spots that look like MS, so a lot of people get misdiagnosed. Each Alzheimer's has, it's probably more of a symptoms, and then, because from what I understand with my grandfather is they couldn't officially diagnose, and maybe this has changed, but they couldn't officially diagnose as Alzheimer's until they actually do an autopsy. And I think it's just fascinating, though, that there's been some research done that on Alzheimer's brains that they found 9 out of 9 brains have spirochetes in them, or Lyme bacteria. So, there's, and if you have MS, it doesn't mean you have Lyme disease. People can have MS without having Lyme disease. So it's tricky because it's such an imitator.